diversion of resources, either by profit or non-profit organizations, I'm talking about government organizations as well as business ones, to political objectives. Campaign contributions. By the same token, diffusion of power calls for governmental organizations that maintain a reasonable balance between the effectiveness that large business organizations can sometimes provide and an avoidance of concentration of power in a few places. The many experiments with privatization of services that had previously, for good or indifferent reasons, been supplied by public agencies are beginning now to show us that switching to the market is not a single sovereign remedy for all administrative ills. The air transportation industry, in spite of rosy reports and one very recently coming out of the Academy of Sciences, which I haven't read yet, maybe it'll convert me to a different view. But the air transportation industry, in spite of rosy reports of consumer savings from deregulation, is a case in point, where one could argue both sides, I think, of the question. Energy distribution, the privatization of that, of education and communications. All are faced today with perplexing economic and organizational problems that illustrate what I have in mind. I could add others. For example, attempted privatization of the prison industry. Now, the fact that we have a prison industry in the scale that we have at all is a national disgrace, but there are particular and special issues with respect to its privatization. It certainly hasn't become a magical cure for criminal tendencies. Experience has indicated that a wide range of essential services can be provided better by the government than by any private business arrangement thus far invented, or as in the case of something like basic research, the Reagan administration admitted quite explicitly, I don't know whether admitted is the right word, because they supported with their actions quite explicitly the policy that basic research will be undersupplied by private enterprise because many of the values it produces are externalities from the standpoint of the producing business, not a part of their profit statement. Those are the public goods aspects if they're left to competitive markets. Government organizations, of course, are also needed to enforce the rules of the game, their minimal traditional role, including the enforceability of contracts without which markets don't exist. And to perform services, as I've indicated, that are unlikely to be performed effectively by the private sector. In performing these functions, government agencies themselves, of course, become centers of power that, if they don't become too effective centers of power, help balance the power exerted by the private sector in its own interests. A pure market economy, even if thinkable, cannot achieve high productivity, and markets and private organizations alone cannot maintain a broad distribution of power, nor deal with the provision of public goods and the avoidance of negative externalities, environmental effects, for example. A balance of private organizations, markets, and public organizations is essential. The organizations providing the requisite coordination of activities and efficiency, the markets keeping the organizations' noses to the economic grindstone and limiting their ability to acquire purposes of their own, an enforcement of responsibility. But there are other issues that need to be settled in the design of institutions of a society. Distribution of the social product. There's really very little consensus in the economics profession today about how to maintain high levels of employment and production, even though at the moment, and for quite a little time now, we've been enjoying these conditions. Many economists, at least when I take the poll, many economists, when asked why this high employment has preserved, sort of look to heaven and sigh a little bit. Among my friends and acquaintances who are macroeconomists or specialists on money, I only find one point of fairly general agreement. Even here there are a few gold standard types still around. Most agree that money is neither a solid substance, nor a liquid, nor a gas. It's simply a state of mind. More precisely, money's value is a collection of states of mind of all the people who hold it and use it. These states of mind, as history shows, can change in a short time from utmost confidence in a currency to utmost skepticism, and vice versa. On the role of government spending and monetary policy in determining the level of activity, expert opinions in the economics profession today range from the laissez-faire of rational expectations to Keynesianism and even well beyond that. Now, I'm, by some labels, I'm supposed to be an economist, but I wouldn't want to rest too heavily on that claim. On this important topic, there's really only one thing that I feel confident about, and that is that economic equilibrium, the maintenance of economic equilibrium, and equilibrium of power cannot be left to the care of the invisible hand of the market without governmental attention. What economists call Say's law guarantees that the economy can be in equilibrium at any level of activity, from full employment down to zero employment. Because at any level of activity, the goods it produces yield income to the producers, the employees, the capitalists, and the others, which are just enough to buy the goods again. You can have equilibrium at any level of employment. So production produces total incomes that are just sufficient to purchase the market product. If markets are often not at full employment, and some of us here have lived long enough to have experienced such periods, especially if we've lived in other parts of the world, but if we've lived long enough in the United States, if markets are often not at full employment equilibrium, neoclassical economic theory simply does not explain why, nor does it explain what to do about it. I don't mean there aren't neoclassical economists who won't give you an explanation. I mean there's no uniformity of opinion in that profession. Now, one final issue, and that is, how do we distribute this social product? Is that something we might leave to markets, or just to the working of organizations that are designed to produce things efficiently and then distribute them? Well, maybe not. Just as competitive markets cannot by themselves guarantee an adequate distribution of power in a society or full employment, so they don't guarantee that they will distribute income and wealth in a fashion that will satisfy our notions of fairness. Now, fairness, of course, isn't a question of fact. It's a question of values, and I've been known to argue that values can't be deduced purely from facts. I'll stick to that today. I wouldn't like to be caught out violating that principle. So I'm going to limit myself to showing the consequences if we took a particular definition of fairness that has some currency in our society. I don't mean it's the only one. People often will agree that it is fair that people receive and be allowed to retain what they earn. Now, I'm not advocating your adoption of this definition. I'm simply using it to illustrate the complexities of the design of social systems that take fairness into account. Let me pose a simple question to all of you. I won't ask for a showing of hands, but you can just answer it quietly to yourself. Consider the income that most of you and your family now earn as members of American society. There are people here, I'm sure, who are not members of American society, but we'll focus on ourselves for the moment, our in-group here, and compare that income with the income you'd expect to earn if you were equally hard-working members of Chinese or Indian society or the society of any other third world nation. I expect that for most of you, the difference between the two incomes is one or more orders of magnitude. At least 10 to 1, maybe more than 100 to 1. But each one of you can answer that for yourself. Now, I'd like to next ask you to consider the causes for the gap between the 10 to 1 or 100 to 1. How much of that gap between your income and what you'd be earning if you were toiling in one of these other societies today, how much of that gap do you wish to attribute to your superior energy, motivation, and application of effort as compared with your third world counterparts? And how much do you wish to attribute to your good luck or good judgment in being born as or becoming a member of the highly productive and democratic American society? Which way how are we going to balance the fractions between the two? Now, if we're very generous with ourselves, I suppose we might claim that we earn as much as a fifth of it. I personally think 10% is closer to the fact. The rest is the patrimony associated with being a member of an enormously productive society that has accumulated a vast store of physical capital and an even larger store of intellectual capital, including knowledge, skills, and the organizational know-how held by all of us, and particularly by political scientists and public administration people. So that interaction with our equally talented fellow citizens in our society rubs off on us both much of this knowledge and this general allotment of unearned income. It's one of our externalities. Every time we talk to another person, also well educated, we learn things, they learn things. It's great. Now, I don't have any specific proposal for allocating the unearned income of this affluent society. If I had, I'd probably be running for office right now. That, of course, is one of the important things we will be voting on in November. And clearly, the allocation of income in the society is a matter of values to be decided by political processes. What I wish to emphasize is simply that public attitudes about fair allocation of income are necessarily and justifiably a major factor in determining the scope and nature of public organizations in the society. There's no way in which the proper allocation of the social product can be left solely to the market in a private organization, market, public organization society like ours or any other modern society, or be left solely to considerations of productive efficiency. It's no answer to a political proposal for redistribution of something to say, oh, that wouldn't be Pareto optimal. Well, let me wind up this argument now and see where it leaves us. It's not too fanciful, I believe, to think of writing a history of human civilization in terms of progress in the means of human cooperation, that is, of organizations. Maybe I've just lived with them too long and lost my balance in my regard for them. In that history, hierarchical and nearly decomposable systems would play a central role. That's just the central feature of successful organizational design. Almost from the beginning, the division of work into component tasks and the assembly of the components into a hierarchy were discovered to be powerful means for achieving effective coordination of effort. In a later period, markets entered as a means of coordinating certain kinds of transactions that require relatively limited communication and therefore can take place over long distances. Then, long before the Christian era, nation-states and empires emerged that show there's almost no upper limit to the sizes to which organizations can aspire. The social system, after nearly another millennium, entered a new stage when the social store of knowledge and innovation in technologies began to accelerate, with markets again at first playing a central role in enabling these developments. Gradually, increases in the demands for and in the advantages of more coordination in economic activity, together with the accumulation of skills of organizing, brought into existence ever larger corporations that began to emulate in size the administrative organizations of the nation states and were launched into our modern world. Both private and public organizations have played essential roles in these modern developments, complementing each other's functions, learning from each other, and at the same time competing for power to steer and manage the systems that have emerged. This process has not reached its end, and political science and economics must continue their mutual education with each discipline learning from the other. The education has to be symmetric. Its goal is not to convert political science into a theory of public choice of a mythical, utility-maximizing economic person. Its goal is to understand how human behavior molds and is molded by the complex structures it employs to secure the coordination needed to accomplish most of its goals, and how this can be accomplished while preserving the wide dispersion of power that is essential for democratic institutions. Thank you.